I'm Emily, a 35-year-old full-time homemaker. Just the other day, I gave birth to twin siblings, John and Sarah. It took 2 days from contraction to delivery, and I was physically at my limit. But when I saw my baby, who was born with a healthy first cry, my fatigue disappeared. Originally, I was supposed to go home, but 1 month before I gave birth, my mother was hospitalized for surgery. My parents were eagerly awaiting my return home with the babies. My mom even said, even though she's recovering from surgery, it's okay for me to bring them over. But this time, we prioritized my mom's health, decided not to move back in, and do our best by cooperating with my husband. But instead of a joyful time raising our children, something unexpected happened. What I am going to tell is the story of the fierce harassment that I experienced at that time. It was the third morning after I gave birth to my twins and returned to my apartment. Suddenly, the intercom at home rang loudly. Who could it be at this early hour? When I looked through the peephole in anger, it was my mother-in-law outside the door. What? My mother-in-law? Why? I quickly unlocked the door, and my mother-in-law swung the door open and barged in. She made a loud noise when she entered the house, so when John heard the noise, he woke up, and then Sarah woke up as well. The babies had been crying a lot last night, and just when they'd finally fallen asleep, my mother-in-law completely disrupted it. She apparently came over by taxi, and I couldn't just turn her away, so I headed towards the kitchen to serve some tea and snacks. Oh my, what a mess. I can't believe my son is living in such conditions. Emily, you haven't been slacking on your chores just because you had a baby, right? My mother-in-law was like the annoying mother-in-law in a classic TV drama, tracing her finger along the windowsills to see if there was any dust. I'm sorry, but they cried so much last night that I hardly slept. I'll clean up when they calm down. As I was trying to console the crying twins, my mother-in-law swatted my hand away, took the babies, and said, I'll take care of the twins. Sleepless night? Doesn't matter. Don't slack off just because of that. Start your house chores early if you're a good wife. Despite my exhaustion, she told me to start housework immediately. No matter how much I tried to explain, my mother-in-law didn't listen and was only focused on the twins. Reluctantly, I prepared some formula milk to hand to my mother-in-law, only for her to say, What? You're feeding them formula? Any mother would breastfeed, right? What kind of unloving parent are you? I was so shocked to hear the one thing I was most self-conscious about. I nearly started crying. Holding back tears, I did as she told and began cleaning the room. Although my mother-in-law had said she would take care of the kids, she just casually soothed them. When their diapers were dirty, she seemed to hate changing them and called me, who was in the middle of house chores, to do it. I couldn't progress with my chores, and I didn't understand what she came here to do. Moreover, for the next 2 months, she came over almost every day and continued to soothe the babies, half-heartedly. This time is nothing but pain, because she keeps complaining about me. I wanted to talk with my husband, but he's always dead tired after a long day at work, so I never found the opportunity. For 2 months, I endured snide comments from my mother-in-law. When she told me she wouldn't be coming anymore from the next day, I thought I was finally free. But to my surprise, she suddenly held out her right hand and said, Hey, pay me quickly! 2 months worth of transportation expenses and thanks for helping with childcare. It's normal, right? Unbelievable. She was demanding both travel expenses and a thank you payment from me. I snapped at her words. What are you talking about? When did I ask for your help? If I had asked, it would be a different story, but I never did. In fact, your presence for the past 2 months has been nothing but unpleasant. Please don't come here anymore. Saying that, I kicked my mother-in-law out of the house. Immediately after that, I packed our things and took my twins back to my childhood home. I felt guilty burdening my mother, but I couldn't find peace if I stayed here. On the other hand, my mother-in-law went and spilled everything to my father-in-law and husband. She painted herself as the victim, saying that despite all her efforts, I had spoken harshly to her. When my husband came home to find us missing, he was taken aback. Upon hearing the situation from me, he turned pale and stormed off to his parents' house the next day. My father-in-law, who had only heard my mother-in-law's side of the story, turned white as a sheet when he heard what my husband had to say. Oh no, what have you done, dear? He suddenly turned on my mother-in-law, his face a mask of fury. My father-in-law is usually a mild-mannered man, and he rarely gets angry. Even my husband had never seen him so mad. My husband was at a loss for words, and my mother-in-law was flustered. What? Why are you so mad? Isn't the one at fault her? After all, I went out of my way to reduce her burden of childcare, even spending on travel expenses. Why should I be the one getting scolded? My mother-in-law's argument is that she acted after thinking about me, and insisted that she did nothing wrong. No, you don't understand anything. Do you know who her grandfather is? While trembling with anger, my father-in-law stared at my mother-in-law with his eyes wide open. Who? You mean the scary-looking old man who came to the wedding? I remember you bowing and scraping to him, but what about him? Don't tell me. You're being threatened by that old man? No! That man is the chairman of my company. When my mother-in-law heard those words, she let out an unintentional, "What?" As it turns out, my grandpa is the chairman of a major corporation. My wedding was quite a large affair, with several CEOs of famous companies in attendance. My grandpa is strict with both himself and others, not the type to laugh or engage in pleasurable conversation much, but he dotes on his granddaughter, me. Every time we met, he'd buy me expensive toys or take me to expensive restaurants. When I got married, I later heard from Grandma that Grandpa was so happy he cried, which surprised everyone. Given how much Grandpa dotes on me, he would definitely not stay silent if he knew about what my mother-in-law had done. Under normal circumstances, one would already be scared stiff just by that. But there was another reason why my father-in-law wouldn't want this getting out to grandfather. I was on the cusp of either getting a promotion to a managerial position or not. If I became a manager, my salary would significantly increase from what it is now. It was an important time for me to give my best, and yet, without understanding how I felt, you stirred up this mess. What on earth were you thinking? My father-in-law could care less about me. Right now, all he's thinking about is his promotion, rather than his family. My husband, who knew his father's true intentions, seemed to be deeply disappointed that he didn't think about the twins and me, even though he was his own parent. He said, "Enough is enough. I'm disappointed in my dad who only thinks about himself, and shocked at my mom who's been bullying my wife. Just stay out of our lives." Hearing her son's words of disownment, my mother-in-law rushed towards my husband with an incredible force. "Don't joke around. You're the heir to this family. I won't let you abandon this house. I'm going to go to Emily's place and talk some sense into her. She is our daughter-in-law, after all. She needs to handle the household properly." Upon hearing this, my father-in-law said to his wife, "You're not planning on barging into Emily's parents' house, are you? Don't do anything that rash. I'll lose my chances of a promotion. Don't interfere." Upon hearing these words, my husband left his family home without uttering a word. He came to my parents' house on foot, explained what had happened, and apologized. Her husband's face looked sad rather than angry. "I can't believe my own parents are like this. I'm sorry." In response to my husband, my parents didn't say a word. "Come on, let's eat dinner since you're here," they offered. "That's right, James. You can stay here for the night if you like. Our house is close to your apartment. You can just bring a change of clothes." At first, my husband was hesitant because of the kindness of my parents, but after a long time, he wanted to relax with the twins and decided to stay at my house. It's been a while to have a relaxing time with family. Seeing my husband cuddling our crying twins was quite endearing. When it came time to sleep, the twins were sandwiched between me and my husband. I wished that we could always have such peaceful times. But I knew my mother-in-law would not stay silent. Deep down, I feared she might show up suddenly. But at that moment, nobody imagined that she would strike so quickly. The next day, while my parents were at work, the doorbell at my parents' house rang incessantly. I had a bad feeling about this. When I peeked at the intercom, to my surprise, my mother-in-law had shown up, unannounced. "Open the door! I know you're in there! Give me back my grandchildren!" She kept knocking on the door, saying those words. My mother-in-law rang the intercom repeatedly while banging on the door, and the twins were crying so much. I was almost going crazy, but then a person opened the front door for me. Finally, you opened the door! Now quickly hand over the twins to— Wait, who are you? The person who opened the door instead of me was my grandfather. Who do you think you are, banging on someone's door like this? How rude! Whether my grandfather was angry or not, he spoke with a stern voice to my mother-in-law. As expected of my mother-in-law, she looked dumbfounded and couldn't say anything because he spoke to her with such a voice. Wait a minute. You can't be the chairman my husband has mentioned, can you? My mother-in-law, her voice was shaking, asked my grandpa. Huh. Oh, now I remember. Are you James' mother-in-law? I didn't recognize you because you didn't introduce yourself at the wedding. My mother-in-law had been entirely against our marriage. She felt as though she was losing her son she had raised so carefully, and she adamantly refused to attend the wedding. However, the people around her managed to persuade her to attend the wedding, but I heard that she didn't say hello to my relatives at all and just sat in the waiting room with a sullen expression. So it's no wonder my grandpa didn't recognize her. When he realized she was my mother-in-law, my grandpa's face turned even more intimidating, and he stared at my mother-in-law, who was trembling. I had previously told my grandfather everything I had been through. He probably expected my mother-in-law to burst into the house, which is why he had been staying here for a while. Well, the real reason was that he wanted to see the grandchildren I had given birth to. But he hadn't expected such an early assault. I didn't come here to bother you, Emily. I just came to see the twins because you brought them here without telling me. It's cruel not to tell me, isn't it? She insisted that she just came to see the twins and not to harass me. However, I couldn't believe the words of the mother-in-law, who had been banging on the door and pressing the intercom repeatedly, yelling to give back her grandchildren. Is that so? But didn't you tell your granddaughter earlier to return my grandchildren? Since when did they become your possessions? Even my mother-in-law couldn't ignore these words, and she argued back. What are you talking about? Those kids are the grandchildren of our family. Especially John, who is the heir. They are rightfully our grandchildren, not yours. Yes, the only reason she doted on the twins was because they were the heirs. She also loved Sarah, but John, being the heir, was her favorite. I see. I understand your affection for the twins, but is it right to neglect their mother, who is exhausted after childbirth? You forced your way into her home, which is quite a terrible thing to do, isn't it? My mother-in-law was taken aback by these words and began to look pale again. Wait, you're not going to tell my husband about this, are you? He specifically told me not to come here. I can't let him find out. Even though my father-in-law was strongly advised my mother-in-law not to come here, she came here on her own will. If her husband found out, she might even be got divorce papers. So she begged him to keep her visit a secret. But there was no way he could accommodate such a request. He said to the flustered mother-in-law, "What are you talking about? There's no need to hide anything, especially if there's something to feel guilty about. I'll let your husband know that you came to visit us. Now, be sure to make an appointment next time you come, okay?" Leaving these words behind, he closed the front door. Normally, my mother-in-law would have knocked on the door many times and pressed the intercom many times. But now that the grandpa, who was the chairman, is at home, it seems that this time she went home quietly. She didn't say anything about her abrupt visit to my family's home, but my grandfather later summoned her husband to his office and explained what had happened. Despite having been emphatically told not to go to our home, my father-in-law was visibly angry that his wife had done so anyway. I deeply apologize for my wife's thoughtless actions. I'll make sure she never does anything like this again. He apologized sincerely to my grandfather. My father-in-law was sincerely apologizing to my grandfather. He had to apologize for his promotion. But my grandfather wasn't so naive as to fail to see through my father-in-law's true motives. True, what your wife did is inexcusable. But don't you share some of the blame? You seem to only think about immediate concerns and don't pay much attention to those around you. There's a lot of dissatisfaction with you at the workplace. I can't possibly promote someone like that." In the end, my father-in-law's promotion was taken off the table. Thinking that he couldn't get promoted because of his wife, my father-in-law went home, gave his wife an earful, and slammed down a completed divorce paper on the table before packing his bags and leaving. Until now, my mother-in-law has lived only on my father-in-law's salary, so if he abandons her, she will not be able to live in the future. She tried to persuade him, but it was too late. The damage had been done and was beyond repair. All of this happened because of that woman. She should never have married my beloved James. I can't forgive her. I'll never forgive her. Having lost everything, my mother-in-law went on a rampage and stormed my parents' home. She banged on the door and shouted at the top of her voice, "I've lost everything because of you. If only you weren't here. Give me back my grandchildren. Give me back James." It was already past 9 p.m. It's extremely insane to bang on the door while yelling at a time like this. Unable to endure it any longer, my husband called the police. My mother-in-law was taken to the police station in a squad car. To the very end, he apologized to my parents and my grandfather for causing trouble, but they knew that my husband was not at fault. Feeling relieved that peace had finally returned to our home was a refreshing feeling. Hopefully, no one will bother us anymore. It would be nice to finally live peacefully. It was regrettable that things had turned out this way, but knowing that we could finally focus on raising our kids in peace, I felt a sense of relief. Afterwards, my in-laws divorced. My mother-in-law returned to her parents' home. The home where my mother-in-law was living was in a remote rural area, much like Nebraska, where only a few buses run per day. Without a driver's license, it wouldn't be easy for my mother-in-law to travel here. My mother-in-law, who had been so eager to have her grandchildren all to herself, seemed to be having a hard time living without seeing them. She apparently repeatedly begged my husband to let her see the grandchildren and to make up with me. But my husband, unable to forgive his self-centered mother, blocked her calls. My mother-in-law, who was unable to meet her grandchildren and was cut off from her son, became completely absent-minded. It seems that her parents didn't say anything to sympathize with my mother-in-law. Having truly lost everything, my mother-in-law locked herself in her room, crying tears of regret every day.